This is Tim Arbeiter, Director of the Office of Broadband Development for the Missouri Department of Economic Development. And joining me today, kind of co-presenting alongside, is Liz Roberts, and I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, everyone. Like Tim said, I am Liz Roberts. I'm with the Missouri Department of Agriculture, and we have been partnering with the Office of Broadband on this program and very excited for its launch.
And also with us today, we have a couple people from the Department of Economic Development's communications team, and we have Ashton Keever, Marketing Specialist, and Eric Thurman, who is also a Marketing Specialist. So thank you to Eric and Ashton for being with us today. Before we dive into the webinar, let me give some overall thank yous to Governor Parson for his leadership in the advancement of broadband infrastructure and his infrastructure priorities, in conjunction with the Missouri Legislature in appropriating the funds and the creation of the grant program. So our enormous thanks to all leaders in the legislature and the governor's office for their leadership and support on this. And also a thank you to Director Dixon and Director Chen from the Missouri Department of both the Missouri Department of Economic Development and the Missouri Department of Agriculture. Directors Chen and Dixon have been stalwarts in the advocacy of the launch of the program and all the services related to broadband and its support. So with that, let me go over just a couple housekeeping items, kind of the big question I've been getting over the last couple of days. Will the webinar be recorded? Will the presentation be made available? And yes, on both accounts, in case there are others within your organization and company would like to experience the webinar, it will be recorded. We will be utilizing the chat feature for any questions that come about kind of during and after. We will set aside time at the end of the webinar to answer as many questions as we can. We are slated to be together till now until 2:15, so we've budgeted what we hope is enough time to get through as many questions as possible. And if you're participating with just audio only, like you're calling into the webinar and unable to see the presentation or to utilize the chat feature, please know it will be recorded, the presentation posted, but then our contact information is available to do any follow-up questions that you may have, and we will certainly do the best we can to meet those needs as quickly as we possibly can. So with that, we're going to go to our first slide. So program purpose. The program purpose really is well defined in the Missouri statute of the intent to expand broadband infrastructure to our critical or high cost areas of the state, and those being our unserved and underserved, with top priority being unserved areas in the state of Missouri. And we'll cover the definition of what that means in just a little bit. But how is this going to work? By statute, it was designed as a match program. In traditional senses, a 50-50 match. But for clarification, it literally could be up to 50%, depending on the number of partners and entities coming alongside for the program itself. Eligible applicants. The list is actually fairly robust when you look at the number of entities that could be provided assistance with the program, and those including corporations, businesses or partnerships, LLCs, nonprofits, political subdivisions, and again, rural electric co-ops and their broadband affiliates. So the eligible applicants is fairly large, and so it actually bears out in some of the things that is asked of the applicants in the paperwork in regard to some of the other needs when it comes to granting dollars to public or private entities. Next slide. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, the definition in state statute for unserved are those areas of Missouri that are not yet attaining or just at 10 megabits down, 1 megabit up or below. And then our underserved areas is in that in-between space of not quite yet 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up, but above 10.1. So it's in that in-between. And areas that are served are those areas that are deemed 25.3 or above. And so those would be deemed served areas. throughout the establishment of the program, one of the key questions came up: will the areas or the project areas identified need to be contiguous? And the answer is yes. The project areas need to be contiguous, and therefore applications need to reflect that. The starting point for data on determining unserved, underserved, and served areas resides from the Federal Communications Commission, or acronym FCC, from data that is submitted by national providers from all gamuts into the FCC, which is called the Form 477. This will be determined to establish the baseline speeds that are currently being offered in Missouri. But really, that's our starting point for that. And we'll address that a little bit later in case there's some questions regarding eligibility. So our next slide is ineligible areas. And so this is actually pretty prescribed in the statute itself. Any areas receiving assistance from other federal type programs or other broadband programs like the Connect America Fund, Universal Service Fund assistance, USDA programs, or other federal programs that did not require a matching fund component. I am receiving some questions from or companies who are researching particular areas, and we're looking at the nuanced programs that are defined. So if there are questions of specificity that you need addressed, we are happy to get those in follow-up discussions and or emails trying to build out your potential application. I did want to float in, and these hyperlinks will be made available in the presentation when we post it, but the FCC has a really good website in reflection of current deployments for the Connect America Fund map. And then also USDA has a strong resource in relation to their GIS mapping feature of their existing programs that are available, made available on the web. So as you're building your application, there's some additional resources to see if an area is receiving additional federal support. Again, I will put the caveat, those supports or programs that are utilizing and did not require a matching component to it would be deemed ineligible. Other ineligible areas would be those areas that are deemed 25.3 or above. And so just make that note. And again, that's reflected in statute. So therefore, the state minimum defined statute, or I'm sorry, the state minimum defined expectation is that it would fund at least 25.3 or greater or expandable down the road. And so that was pretty well spelled out in our Missouri statute. Next slide. A coverage map of Missouri is being provided. It's also available on the grant webpage, but what this entails is what reflects on the current Form 477 data through the Federal Communications Commission. The latest data set available was June 2018, and while you may say to yourself, that's a little ways back, that is the most recent data set available. And so what we have to do is that's our starting point of coverage maps for Missouri. So let me kind of walk through this slide itself. The light green areas are those unserved areas, so 10.1 or below. When I'm deeming hot green, some people laugh at me when I say that, but kind of that lime green, hot green areas are those in-between areas that underserved. So above 10.1, but not quite 25.3. Hunter green or dark green is really those served areas. And so a question that I typically get is, I look at my particular area and it's showing that I'm served, or I'm showing it's underserved, but we think we are unserved. What we're affording the opportunity through the grant process is for applicants to submit some evidence, kind of stating the FCC data reports may be overstated, and therefore applicants will need to supply some evidence to kind of counter what the FCC data is saying. This is one of the things that we know from other states that they do when they launch their grant programs, is that applicants are allowed the opportunity to submit different types of evidence, kind of maybe countering what is out there on the Federal Communications data set. Additional point to be made on this, because the last data set is June 2018, we do know that there have been expansions in multiple areas of Missouri by existing broadband providers. And that runs the gamut from all different sectors. And so we know because of the year lag of data delay, we will probably be made aware once we post and announce the applicants through the challenge process. And I'll walk through that a little bit later, but the challenge process is the opportunity for existing providers to say, I am currently serving the area that's being proposed, and therefore I'd like to submit to the Department of Economic Development to be considered a challenge to that particular application. So again, that's another question I get from folks about the year lag delay in data. Next slide, and I'm going to hand it over to Liz.
All right, let's talk about eligible expenses. Applicants can fund only the acquisition and installation of retail broadband internet service with baseline speeds of 25 down and 3 up in the area proposed to be served. And you can see on your screen some examples of generally eligible project costs: construction of broadband facilities, final engineering and construction plans, permitting, installation, and validation of service. Most of those are pretty self-explanatory, but I want to stop on validation for just a moment. The validation will determine that the project meets the original design, the build has been completed, and that the installed infrastructure will provide the service level stated in the application. The validation will require certification from a professional engineer. That, of course, is certified in Missouri, and it cannot be the engineer who originally designed the project. That gives the project and the validation some checks and balances and allows some due diligence there. Okay, let's move on to selection criteria. The selection criteria is designed to give priority to projects that provide the highest return in public benefit for the public cost incurred. As you can see here, there are 130 points total, and each area is weighted accordingly on the priorities that are reflected in the legislation. Anticipated broadband improvements is worth 25 points, and that's where we're going to look at the number of unserved and underserved connections to be served by the project and the proposed speed improvement. And we'll show you kind of a chart or a table later on that will break that down for you. The grant funding requested amount, there are 20 points here. There is a 50-50 match requirement for the program per statute, and simply meeting that requirement is worth 10 points. But projects that exceed the requirement by putting in more local funds will have the ability to gain extra points in this category. Project readiness is worth 20 points, and applicants should demonstrate here the organizational capacity to initiate, construct, and launch the project. We'll need to see a comprehensive knowledge of the project demonstrated, along with evidence of being prepared to begin construction within 90 to 120 days following the grant award. Sustainability needs to address how the applicant has demonstrated strong internal capacity to effectively support and sustain its broadband infrastructure proposal. So we're going to want to see a demonstration of technical expertise, organizational support, and financial viability. Community participation is very important, and we're defining community as essentially the service area. It could be several communities, it could be several farming operations down a lettered road, but we want to see evidence of significant community participation that aids the overall project. And this is both financial and non-financial. Economic development and community impact review is worth 15 points, and this will measure whether the applicant has demonstrated the economic development and community enhancement potential of the proposed project. Here again, we'll be looking at the number of households, businesses, farms, et cetera, in the proposed project area, which may benefit from improved broadband services. And finally, broadband adoption assistance. You'll hear us talk about this a lot. We'll want to see that there's a plan in place to actively promote the adoption of newly available broadband service with a marketing campaign, other outreach. We'll want to see if there's going to be technical support or training to be provided to residents, businesses, and institutions in the community. If there's a low-income broadband assistance program to be offered, definitely outline that for us. Okay, turn it back over to Tim.
All right, kind of moving to the application itself. Again, these are some of the major highlights that are in the application, but I thought we would take the time to actually hop over to the actual application and kind of do just kind of a general run through for the particular document itself. So Eric, let's go ahead and transition over to the application. Here it is. A lot of work and research went into this application to make it as user-friendly as we possibly could, to understanding the fact that this is a very technical type of program, but we also wanted to be understanding that there may be other organizations, communities, counties, maybe even some regions that are looking at it. So we wanted to build it as user-friendly as we possibly could. What I will kind of go through right now, and Eric will just do maybe a slow scroll, as you would expect, applicant information, the project manager, maybe the director of operations, or who will kind of be overseeing the actual construction. If you know that from your team, that'd be great to put here. CFO or director of financial services for your company or organization would go next. If you're utilizing a grant administrator, whether that's internal to your team or if you're utilizing an external type of grant operation, this would be good information just based on some things that may come up during the construction cycle and even post closeout. Kind of scrolling down a little bit, just knowing what know kind of entity is applying, and just as Liz mentioned earlier, this is an opportunity to grab some data points on households, farms, businesses, significant community institutions. These are words that are reflected in the statute. So let's kind of walk through that a little bit. Significant community institutions, healthcare facilities or medical clinics, maybe the volunteer fire service has a facility in the area, schools, maybe even some significant nonprofits that has a general public service nature. Those type of unique things that if we were able to include them in the project would have significant public benefit or significant opportunity to really do some wonderful things with the broadband expansion. Project duration, and then again, we'll go down to the funding sources section of the application. A little note here on the upper left-hand corner of the application is total project cost. So again, what is the total cost? And then again, where are the available funding resources that you're identifying for this particular project? Just maybe a helpful hint on that. All the federal dollars, county, local, private, state grant request, all of them need to total the total project cost. That needs to line up. And then moving down on the application, just what kind of early preparation has been done by the company or their organization in working with the local municipalities or county, any environmental reviews that have been considered, and then as well as any architectural or state historic opportunities that we need to be aware of. Moving down to the narrative. A point I will make on this particular section of the application, again, back to trying to be as user-friendly as we possibly can, the selection criteria is actually also reflected in the application itself. So there's, while you can hop back and forth between the criteria in the application just to do a double check, but in all cases, we brought over that verbiage from the selection criteria and reflected it in the application. So you would not have to do that back and forth. But again, let's go into the narrative itself, the executive summary. This is just a short synopsis of the project, what your company or organization is intending to do. This is a great quick read as we look to the overall application process and then post-award. Just as Liz mentioned in the selection criteria with the anticipated broadband improvements, this is top high priority listed in the statute, so that's why you see it listed first. Again, number of connections, based on the speeds that you're taking them from and taking them to, will be the determination of points factors related to the anticipated broadband improvements. Again, while we're asking for very similar information than what was on page 1, we would also like it reflected in the narrative. It is just helpful when we talk about the statement of need. This is back to telling your story, the overall importance of this project and what it would mean for your neighborhood or your community or in your county. This is your opportunity to tell the story to the reviewers of why your application stands out from all the others. Project readiness. What we look at for here is the opportunity to, again, Liz had conveyed it extremely well. It's ready to go. It can be determined with the opportunities for what's being made available to the applicant via this grant, but the ability to operate the project, the budget materials are all in, the required documentation is submitted, and it includes the broadband infrastructure requirements and the project implementation details. Forgive me for that. So as we scroll down the application, we go into the budget section. As typical in most grants, they typically like to look at your project budget. And so what we will look at here is the overall line items you're looking to do with this particular program. What do you envision the respective dollars to go to in respective to the line item? So are you seeking grant funds for construction, the actual design and engineering, or will that be used by applicant funds or other federal sources itself? Again, this is a format that we recommend. There may be other formats that you may supply in your application, and that will hold true for the project work plan. These are recommended formats. If you have other formats that are easier for you to use, the only thing that we ask is that it's easy to understand and flow through when we get to the review phase of the applications itself. Again, these are just recommended. But the work plan format, Eric, if you'll scroll back up a little bit, as typical work plans flow is your actual project activity, your timeline that you would dedicate to that, and then your activity milestone. Where do you anticipate in the construction schedule for that to occur? We're going to scroll down to the project sustainability. This is the technical expertise, your organizational capacity to not only launch the program, construct the program, but maintain and sustain the actual construction of what's being done. One of the things, again, with it being public resources, we want to be able to see opportunities that this could be expanded down the road or speed levels increased depending on what you're proposing in your application. And then also, this is where we would also look at the financial wherewithal of the organization or company that's submitting the request. The ability to have the capacity to maintain and manage this size of a project. And many entities that are probably on the webinar probably operate and have designed and leveraged much larger projects than what might be available in this grant program. Eric will go to the next page. Community participation, as Liz mentioned, it is an important feature. It is highlighted in the statute as an opportunity to partner, whether that be financially or letters of support. This would be the opportunity to demonstrate that through either letters or a willingness of other partners like a community coming alongside to make this broadband project an option. Economic and development and community impact. Looking for some additional data points on the areas that you're proposing, depending on where you're at. What is the overall data points that are reflected in that general area? Again, this will help us grab some of the baseline data in looking at what overall impact can we have if this project were to launch and be funded. What can we anticipate from a number of different factors? We're asking for, any type of areas if you're operating that going to do the project area within a distressed area. Maybe what is the unemployment rate in that county? And again, not going to read this point by point, but you can see the things that we're trying to ascertain through your application of what additionally, in addition to getting higher speeds or a connection to the internet, what else can be impacted because of this investment. Scroll down. And the broadband adoption and assistance. This is one of the things I have learned from my colleagues in other states across the nation to address and give an opportunity to the applicants to show how will they advance the recognition or marketing or adoption. Adoption is referring to the number of people who will actually subscribe to the service. While this is an infrastructure program and will fund opportunities to build out the network and expand opportunities, this is addressing the opportunity to actually have more people hop on to the service. It's one thing to build out the infrastructure, it's another thing to have people hop onto it. And then if your particular company or organization has a low to a moderate income program that might be available to potential subscribers, this would be your area to do that. All right, Eric, I think we will head back to the PowerPoint presentation. All right, we will go to the next slide and talk about the attachments. Again, also listed in the application point by point, but one of the things we would want to see is the overall official commitment on the part of the company or organization to submit the application, your letters of support, we've already discussed. Electronic files, one of the things that will help us as we're looking to eligible areas is those electronic files as we look to load those in and compare those against existing FCC data sets. The preliminary engineering report, E-Verify, the eligibility documentation, and the other point being that if your particular application is in an area that is either overstated and you believe the attachments would also need to include the evidence that you're looking to have the review team assess and determine if your area is an eligible area based on unserved and underserved criteria. All right, next slide. Important dates. We will open up the application cycle in a couple weeks, and so that will be made available, and we will actually also post between now and then an Adobe fillable form for the application itself. So that'll be made available by November 5th, but the application cycle opens up then. January 7th is the deadline in 2020. By statute, and this is where I maybe talk a little bit about the challenge process in itself. On January 10th, which is 3 days following the close of the application cycle, we will have to post all the applicants that are seeking broadband grant assistance on the broadband grant webpage. This will be an opportunity for any existing providers in Missouri to look at those potential applicants, the areas that they're proposing, and to really give them the opportunity to say, we would like to issue a challenge to this particular application, and this is why. And so that would be given that opportunity. We will afford the opportunity, if a challenge is filed on a particular application, we will give the applicant an opportunity to respond within 3 days after the challenge. I know some programs don't afford for that, but we felt that could be an appropriate way to do and have for the applicants that are seeking. The challenge process will close on February 24th. In part, that is actually stipulated in statute that 45 days need to pass for the challenge process, and so that will close on February 24th. And this will be a great opportunity. While the challenge process is open, the review process will be occurring. So as challenges come in, assessments can be made, determinations made, but we are anticipating that we would like to announce the awards on March 5th of 2020. Next slide, please. Before we actually go through best practices with Liz, let me take this opportunity to maybe go over to the webpage for the Broadband Grant Program. Everything is here from the dates to the documents, but then I also wanted to kind of scroll down to the bottom portion of the webpage we will actually, on this page is where we'll post the webinar and the PowerPoint presentation. But then there's some also available resources. So Eric, let's just scroll down to the bottom. On the left-hand side of the corner there, you'll see the guidelines and selection criteria. But we also took additional care to try to address as many questions as we could in a frequently asked questions document. I believe it's about an 8 or a 9-page PDF, and tried to address as many questions as we thought. If there are additional questions that come in that need to be incorporated into the document and or clarifications to answers that are provided in the FAQ, we will get it revised and posted so all potential applicants have the opportunity. This is the most recent version of the FAQ. The last time it was revised was on November 8th. And then also we have some, based on the FCC data on unserved, underserved, and served, we have some regional reference maps just so you can see the respective areas of Missouri in a little bit more of a granular fashion. Missouri broadband contacts. One of the key questions I get from communities, counties, regions, other entities, who are the broadband contacts in my area? And so we wanted to provide a PDF of key contacts who deploy broadband in Missouri. So we'll actually have the company name listed by sector, phone number, email, and where they're located. Some of our companies are statewide, and so they have presence all over the place in Missouri, so they may not have a specific location identified, but here are the key contacts that if your entity or organization is seeking a broadband provider to be a partner in this request, here's a great resource for you that you can quickly do that. For my broadband providers and companies on the webinar today, if the information is slightly incorrect or you don't see your company listed on this document, please reach out to me so we can get that updated or included into the PDF itself. In addition, we've also provided kind of an Excel sheet, a raw data form for all the census blocks. This has actually just been updated to include all the census blocks in Missouri. The original version did not include census blocks that had nobody reporting service in those census blocks. This one actually incorporates all the census blocks in Missouri, and so that's been available for just from a raw data standpoint. So I just really wanted to take an opportunity for those on the webinar to see the website and to actually maybe go to the website for additional resources you may need as you work on your application. So Eric, let's go back to the PowerPoint, and I'm going to hand it over to Liz to go through a couple slides about best practices.
Sure, thanks, Tim. I just kind of wanted to share with you all a few, I guess, tricks of the trade. I've been working in grants for a few years now. I won't say how many, but I've had some ups and downs along the way, and hopefully can help you all avoid a few common pitfalls. The first best practice is that partnerships are critical, not only in grants, but specifically in this case, in expanding broadband. I'm sure you all know that by now, that nothing like this can be accomplished in a vacuum. So in your proposal, we're going to want to see evidence of these partnerships indicating that the project is welcome and wanted in the service area. I'll also say that you need to thoroughly complete every piece of information requested. We won't ask for anything that's not important to our review. And make sure that the budget and the narratives match. It sounds like a very simple thing, but nothing trips a reviewer up more than a budget that doesn't match the narrative. So just make sure that if you adjust one, that you adjust the other before submission. Ensure the narrative tells the story of the project and its service area. Answer the questions, right to the selection criteria, that's great, but not too much. Use maps, photos, personal accounts, anything that you consider beneficial to helping you tell your story. Don't get carried away, of course. Make sure it's not all circumstantial. Facts and data are imperative, but you will want to make sure that you've conveyed the need and the full story to the reviewers. Fully define the need for the project, outline the work plan, and then build a budget. So a lot of times whenever you're writing a grant, you may assign the narrative to one person, the budget to another person, and the work plan to yet another. And you'll need someone at the end of that process to go back and make sure that you're speaking in one voice, that the narrative tells the story, the work plan reflects the milestones within the narrative, and that the budget aligns to the work plan. So it should all flow, it should all connect, and if you do delegate that to several different people, just make sure that somebody is connecting the dots there at the end. And keep in mind that the reviewers rating the proposal are unfamiliar with the project, include all the details in the proposal. You may feel like your answers are repetitive throughout the process. That's okay. Repetition is good for all of us, believe me. Pay special attention to project description on phased projects. So if this is just one phase of a multi-phase project, be very clear about what you're asking the state to fund in this project. Ensure that any match is secured and documented. Get it in writing. There's nothing worse than counting on funds that were verbally committed and then they don't come through, and then you're stuck holding a partially funded project. A lot of folks may feel so inclined to come back to the state and ask for additional funds if their match fell through, but that won't be a possibility. You know, there is a matching requirement. And all awards made will be based on the proposals, and changing proposals after the fact really implicates the viability of a competitive process. Check and double check that all required attachments are there, are submitted. You will not be given an opportunity to submit missing items. I could tell you personal stories from attachments that weren't submitted, and you know, nothing is worse than getting booted out of a really competitive program based on a technicality. So just make sure you use our checklist and that everything is there that needs to be there. Don't overpromise. Be realistic in the project's proposed scope, budget, and timelines. When applications are reviewed, the project is rated and ranked as presented. I mentioned this a little bit earlier. If you come back to us later asking to reduce the number of connections or the speed, that changes the project scope and could be disqualifying for the project because everything is rated and ranked competitively. So keep that in mind. Letters of support that are shell documents used by multiple partners are less convincing than authentic letters. And what we mean here is that it's really hard sometimes to get that authentic letter of support from partners. And so it's tempting and sometimes easier to send out kind of some shell language. This is basically what we'd like you to say. Inevitably, they will send it back to you exactly your shell language on their letterhead and signed. So what you have are the same letters on different letterheads. This cookie cutter approach doesn't typically hold a lot of weight with reviewers as a general rule. While it's not disallowed, it's best to allow each supporter to speak with their own voice. Other reminders and tips. These are not requirements, just helpful hints for you while you are working on your proposal. We only need one copy, so if you're mailing in a physical proposal, we only need you to send one copy. One-sided, about a 1-inch top margin would be sufficient. Please use at least 12-point font. Give our poor reviewers, give their eyesight a break. That's very helpful. The application should be consistent and it should flow. So have multiple people read it and review it, make sure it makes sense and it clearly states the need and it connects to the work plan and the budget. Answer every question and research the sources and make sure that your sources are cited. So we'll also need original signatures. And while we don't have an official page limit on the narrative, we suggest a maximum of about 30 pages or so.
Moving to the application review and scoring, as the applications come in, the eligibility review will occur based on the areas provided in the application. And so the determination of, is it eligible or not, will this also be essentially a potential, challenged application? So the denotion of that will be made. The review team will be made up of a team of professionals put together by the Department of Economic Development, as well as other professionals within the state that have a connection or an opportunity to do broadband operations. And so we'll be assembling that team and getting that as diversified as we can for that impartial review of all the applications based on the selection criteria, ranking it based on the scores that are allotted in the 130 points available. And then as the review process is occurring, challenges may come in and some determinations made on the particular applications provided. The approval notifications, and for those that are not successful in the grant rounds, can be eligible for possible future rounds as it relates to future appropriations requests and determinations by the legislature and the governor. So moving to our next slide. If you are selected, we will have a program agreement for all grantees. Will be executed. The no tax letter due will be submitted. One of the things that we have as a part of this grant program, winning applicants will need to file a performance bond with the department. And this is just as a fail-safe that if something unforeseen would happen to the project and or company/organization, that there is an ability to look at the retrieval of resources in those extreme situations. Quarterly progress reports, the final report upon verification and the grant closeout. And then again, we ask all applicants, whether in all of our programs, on the financial and performance record keeping, during construction, post-construction, and then just from a archive standpoint that it's there if questions were to arise down the road. Applications, the general application itself will be that open record attachments that reflect company-specific information or company-sensitive information, and I also say organization, company and or organization would not, it would be confidential in nature, especially when we're talking about engineering designs of broadband networks. There is some sensitive nature to that and the financial documents and whatnot, but the general, general application itself would be a part of the open records. And now moving to our contact information as we begin the wind down. Here's our contact information for our participants who are audio only. Here's our emails and phone numbers that if there are questions you can't get through the chat feature, that we will ensure that we will get you responses to your inquiries. And then also, just for future engagement, I've actually had several potential applicants reach out for clarification, guidance. We're happy to do that and to get you as much information to guide you in your application process. This will be a good time to know that this is our inaugural round for the Broadband Grant Program. We have learned a ton to date. We will learn a lot more through the process as we move through the first year of this grant program. With that being said, we'll do a post debrief, look at modifications and things that we can do to make the program better in future iterations. But we also, seek to ask, patience and while we attempt to do this program as best as we possibly can, we just want to be mindful of that this is our inaugural round, but we are going to learn a ton and look to potential of round 2. And so with that, I'd like to maybe focus us on our questions that may have come in on the chat feature, and Ashton is going to kind of help guide us through some of those questions that have come in. This will be a good opportunity for us to say, too, we're going to do the best possible, answer these questions in the best way possible as quickly as we can. There may be some questions that will need additional research because of the technical nature of this program. We want to ensure that we get our answers correct and that we are providing the information to all prospective applicants as they come in. So just letting the applicants know. So with that, Ashton, questions that have come in.
Yeah, I think it might be easiest if I don't try to pronounce everyone's names, but I have them recorded in case you'd like to reach out to them after the webinar. So the first question is, for the required 50% match, can it be a federal grant? Can it be a private loan? What about if the loan is from a federal agency?
Those are determinations that we're working through right now through a couple of the inquiries from some applicants on the statute saying federal funding within a program that did not require a match would be ineligible areas. And so we're working through that determination right now with the USDA on their details on each of their programs that they have and done over the years. And so we're working through that piece right now. Once we have that determination made, because again, they operate, USDA themselves operate a handful of programs that we need to make sure that we honor the statute and not providing state resources where federal resources have already been dedicated.
The list of census blocks that were eligible or ineligible on the program website was missing 50K-ish census blocks. Are those to be considered unserved?
That has been updated. Those, yes, are unserved. Those are census blocks that received no reporting at all. But all the actual census blocks that have 343,000 census blocks has been updated and is on the grant webpage and deemed unserved.
Are areas that received funding for broadband through the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act prohibited from participation in the grant award process?
If the particular RF funds was 100% grant and no matching requirement, those would be ineligible areas. If it had a matching requirement, again, that probably goes back to my determinations on the USDA programs themselves. And so we will get a determination on the RF funds themselves, but if they had no matching requirement, they would be ineligible.
If an area received CAF 2 support, but was only built out to 10-1 service, is it still ineligible for this program?
As outlined in statute, all Connect America funds areas that have received assistance or to receive assistance would be areas that will be ineligible.
What is the Form 477 served areas are found to be outdated in some of a carrier's territory? Can they challenge that it actually is served now?
That would actually bear out through the challenge process itself. There's not a mechanism in order to do that one right now currently, because again, with our baseline data set being the FCC, current Form 477, that is our baseline. And so if applicants do submit a request for a grant, the challenge process is that opportunity to say, no, we're actually, currently building, and that's the opportunity for existing providers to make that determination and to let the department know investments are being made, investments will be made, and this is what we're looking to do in the respective project area that is proposing the need for assistance.
Under the eligible expenses section of the program guidelines, it states that projects requesting $500,000 or less in assistance will be given higher priority. However, the scoring guide rewards more points for larger and more expensive projects. How will the department handle this discrepancy when awarding grants?
That particular was actually in the matching requirements rubric. So the higher percentage that the particular partners or entity that's looking to do the project, if that match is higher than a 50% match, higher than a 50% request from and makes the state grant request lower and a lower percentage, that's where those points come in on that. The 500,000 is an opportunity to try to maximize as many area or grants throughout the state as possible. But again, that rubric on the matching requirement is where that's reflected.
What portions of the application will be made available to the general public upon request? Do applicants have the ability to classify portions of their application as confidential?
For those items that are business sensitive in nature, i.e. like the preliminary engineering reports, the financial documents, anything of sensitive company information, if there's additional items beyond that, we can have those conversations, with our legal team in order for those to maybe be deemed confidential. But in general, the general application itself is really an open record.
So the DED forms and the narrative would be open record.
The statute clearly prohibits the department from imposing rates, terms, and conditions that differ from what a provider offers in other areas of its service area. How can the state require a company to lock in its pricing structure for a 3-year period? This would seem to not only impose a rate, but also terms and conditions of the broadband service.
The 3-year or 36-month commitment post-construction was the opportunity for the amount of public investment being made into the project area or with the company and organization that's doing the activity. We felt that it was appropriate to have a certain time frame in order to look at the particular pricing model that's being proposed. Applicants have the ability to propose whatever pricing is appropriate for that particular area as it relates and similar to the immediate area or region that they serve. So really no stipulation on that. It's just the determination of a certain period of time to acknowledge the public resources going into the project itself. So we felt appropriate to have that, as well as the indication that potential applicants, while this may not occur often, but sometimes if pricing models go up immediately following a construction cycle, that could have detrimental impacts. And again, trying to reflect that the public resources going into the project, in some cases up to 50% of the project, the public benefit could be that opportunity, and where we felt appropriate that a 36-month pricing service commitment could be made to allow for that to happen.
The department requests proposals for phased projects when possible. Do you prefer that a 2-phase project be submitted as a single application with a first and second phase, or 2 separate applications?
I'd say those would be reflected in one application. For the ease and convenience of the applicant, indicate if you believe it's a sizable or substantial project, but you envision, it'd probably be conducive for a phasing approach, I would say one application. I don't necessarily think that's necessary to do 2.
Right. But I think our expectation would be that the application would be for only one phase of the project to be completed at this time. And then the other phase would come down the road a bit.
During the presentation regarding community participation, it was indicated that financial and non-financial support would be considered. Will those projects that receive financial support be scored higher than those that don't?
That's reflected in the point category for community participation. And again, that community participation, depending on if it is financial or just a letter of support, is a real opportunity to maybe shine in that particular category.
Is it accurate that the state will expect a project to be completed within a year?
I think that is a guideline. We're asking applicants to put out on their project timeline. Again, we just want the expectation of that the projects could be, up and running and active within 90 to 20 days, 120 days post-grant award, as quickly as we possibly can to get the projects out there. But we understand certain areas of our state have terrain issues. Some areas of our state are also susceptible to more weather patterns than others. So we want to be also cognizant of, too, that there may be some limitations in the construction schedule because of those factors. And so while it is a guideline, I wouldn't, hard and fast. If we can get it done within a year, great. But we also need to acknowledge is construction seasons are construction seasons, and there are some things out of our control.
This one's about the points, regarding specific categories, I guess. And I'm not sure if it was mentioned in the PowerPoint, so I'm going to ask it, but it might be something later. Okay. How many points for project sustainability, community participation, economic development, and community impact, and BB adoption assistance?
What was the first one? Project readiness?
Project sustainability.
Sustainability was worth 20 points. Community participation is up to 15 points. Economic development and community impact, 15 points. And broadband adoption assistance, 15 points.
Thank you. Since funding from the grant program is a one-time payment, does the proposed project have to be completed within a 12-month period? I think you just answered that one.
You just answered that one, huh?
Okay. Many of our clientele at Lincoln University Extension are limited resource producers who live in underserved areas. It's very important for us to help them access broadband services to improve our communication and delivery of programs. How will educational institutions like Lincoln University be able to participate in this infrastructure call for proposals? And are you planning to open a call for proposals seeking to develop the farming community capacity building at the socioeconomic impact of your initiative?
I think probably to answer the first question related on how do universities, and this would also go for public school systems or other educational facilities, those would be deemed significant community institutions or important community institutions that could be reflected if the project area is incorporating that particular school or university. That could be one way of engagement in the potential application itself. Now, as it relates to the second question on other type of opportunities related to socioeconomic factors, this particular grant is really just solely zeroed in on the actual infrastructure build out of broadband. In addition to the grant program, the Office of Broadband Development, in addition to Missouri Department of Agriculture and other major stakeholders, are looking at other types of programming that can be offered, whether it be educational support to area leaders that are looking to get more organized in broadband planning efforts. So that could be another way to address that, but not necessarily addressed in the grant itself.
Did I understand correctly that the engineering firm who completes the PER cannot be the engineering firm on the project?
Oh, on the project.
No, on the project itself. We're looking for two different PEs. If an entity is retained to do the project design, a different PE within the firm could also certify. We just want to be sure that the one who designed it is not the one validating. The reason for this, some states do their own validation and verification. Other states retain, outside entities to do this. But given the actual design itself and the ability of PEs or engineers to design work and also in this case to validate service, we felt that it was from an expediency standpoint, from a company and organization that may be applying, this could be another additional way on how to work on validation. What we will do is commit as a department to do kind of, based on the project timelines, do kind of a mid-timeline visit with myself and potentially someone else from the department, just to do a site visit to see how things are going. And then also gearing up for post-grant closeout, we would do an additional visit and tour of the validation documents and financial reporting.
Are you open to different kinds of matching resources, or is it only a cash match?
Basically, what we're deeming of anything in the in-kind, opportunities for, we kind of deem that leveraged resources. The particular projects that we're looking at here is from, cash and those things that have the ability to complete the project itself. If applicants are putting in some in-kind or anything like that, we would need that reflected in the application, but we're kind of deeming that leveraged resources.
Is a provider required to bring all households to 25.3 or just a certain portion? Put another way, can a project area be for just a portion of a census block?
If that is the project area you're presenting in your application, and it is up to the applicant to determine what is the number of connections they're wanting to make in that project area. So if it is a portion of a census block and you're looking to connect all rooftops or businesses or whatever it may be, the application would need to reflect that. And so whatever's deemed project area, whatever you're looking to do, just needs to be stipulated in your data points. So if it's not, we would also need to see some kind of reflection in the narrative that, of the particular project area, we're not able to get to everybody, but these are the number of connections, and these are the speeds that we're taking them to. Just from a transparency standpoint, that we acknowledge that your project area you're proposing, these are the connections we're looking to make.
There are a number of priorities that are prioritized by statute. Some of those criteria have been worked into the scoring guide. How will those statutory prioritizations be handled when you indicate projects will be ranked by score?
Well, the selection criteria actually reflects the intent of the statute itself. For instance, like anticipated broadband improvements, that is actually reflective of the statute, recognizing the ability to score on speed and connections, whether it be an unserved area or an underserved area. So moving a particular project area, deeming the number of connections within those. So the number of connections, the speeds, gets you a certain, amount of points within the varying degrees and varying levels of service.
So they're weighted.
They are weighted in that reflect. So, unserved being the top priority. Second priority within the statute is unserved and matching. And then third priority is underserved. And so that's reflected in kind of that, the speed rubric, but then also in the matching rubric as well too.
When you say open records, does that mean that anyone can see all the company information, including how much money you make?
Just to go back to previous answer, it really just would be that the general DED forms for the application and the narrative, any company-specific information or organization-specific information would be essentially held in confidential nature and not accessible.
Is an interested entity required to have a local presence in Missouri? Is there a minimum time in business requirement?
First question was local entity in Missouri.
Have a local presence in Missouri.
My answer to that question is if they're, filed with the Secretary of State as a business entity within the state to carry out broadband services. The second answer would be, what was the second question, Ashton?
Is there a minimum time in business requirement?
One of the things that I also get asked of, and I think it's reflective in statute when you talk about project sustainability, and that's reflected in those points there. While there's not a specified number of years in business, the applicants, whether it be a broadband provider or organization, if you're seeking an application, you would need to submit documentation related that you have the ability to do broadband, and then also do you have the financial wherewithal to that. There is a requirement in the features there talking about audited financial statements, to also supplying the most recent quarterly financial statement, and those really is getting at the point of the financial wherewithal to not only do the project, but to manage everything else you're doing as a company. And so if you're not evolved enough as an organization or as a company in that stead of being a registered business in Missouri, or not old enough to have or don't have the necessary financial documents, it may be difficult to really score high in that particular category on project sustainability.
How is the project tracked after completion for compliance?
There will be the grant closeout as far as the actual validation and build out itself, the grant closeout visit from that standpoint. But then also, looking at it from that standpoint, once the grant closeout, the validation, really that kind of that due diligence has really been done in making the outreach. The interesting thing will be to while not a requirement, we'll look at the ability of the applicant to achieve a strong adoption rate. But I think that's already going to be built into the business model itself. And so partly on the part of other aspects that I would do in the Office of Broadband Development is how are the adoption rates holding out? I think that'll help with future applicants that they're looking to. Are they achieving a strong adoption rate or is it below average? And so I think from reporting requirements, once the grant closeout occurs, there will probably be touch points along the way to see how things are going. But once validation and closeout is done, then really any type of reporting after that would be maybe a couple quarters just to kind of get how things are going from an adoption standpoint.
So there's about 10 questions left.
Let's maybe take about 2 or 3 more questions, and then we'll address any other questions that may come up.
Some of them are housekeeping, so I'll save those for the end. Can a company submit more than one grant application?
Yes.
Does the professional engineer approval just have to be done by a separate engineer than the one who designed the project or by a entirely different company? Is that what you answered earlier?
We did answer that earlier. So again, just has to be a different PE than the one who originally designed it.
How does a small community determine if they are a 10-1 versus a 25-3 served community? They do not have broadband in their community. Is this public knowledge or who can tell them?
Certainly we can do it. I can connect with a particular participant on the small community and guide through the various census blocks that may touch that community and whether it's unserved or underserved, depending on the FCC data.
I think it's in relation to, this is a question in relation to that. If a community has a school that has 25-3 service, but the rest of the community does not, does that disqualify the rest of the area?
No, it necessarily does not. Schools, libraries, hospitals typically are able to take advantage of other federal type of programs, and the state has a program itself that is in complementary to the federal program related to E-rate, and sometimes they're able to get assistance and infrastructure built out to those, which would be community institutions to help them be successful in getting connected to high-speed internet.
If I am an ACAM recipient, are my areas off limits to other entities applying for grant funds in my ACAM areas?
Kind of out. Well, that is addressed in statute. If federal assistance and support through, whether it be Connect America Fund, Universal Service Fund programs, those type of programs, again, those particular areas would be ineligible, especially if you have locations that are in your service territory. So my encouragement would be, are there other areas of your service territory not receiving assistance, but extremely, difficult for the particular, provider to build out to? I would look at those particular areas because more than likely they would be unserved as well too.
If we're working on a project that would allow for expanding into a contiguous qualifying area, but it has not begun, could that be included?
I will say that will be our first question that I'm going to have to do additional research on. So we will flag this particular question and do some follow-up in relation to that particular question. That is a very specific question. I need to do some homework on that one.
Okay. Will an environmental assessment be required for a grant award?
The determination in that world is if other federal resources and programs are being brought to bear, then those requirements would be need to be met. But from a state-only perspective, no.
It's been going good. There's only 3 questions left if I can ask.
Yes.
Can the grants be used to help pay for a feasibility study to bring broadband into an area?
No. The statute's pretty prescriptive that it's actual for the construction and installation of broadband services.
Do we have to wait for approval of application and funds to be dispersed to begin a project? So I think, does that kind of connect to the one that you want to do more research on? No?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I mean, my encouragement would be no, that the projects need to be awarded prior to any construction beginning.
I agree. So the housekeeping questions are, will the map files be available on the website after this?
They are on the grant website in PDF format, and then we have the census blocks updated via Excel format. Again, that's just raw data. So.
And then will each of the questions and answers asked today be included in the FAQ doc and available online at a later date?
If there are questions that are not currently reflected in the FAQ, then yes, but I believe maybe about, if I was guessing, probably 60 to 70% of the questions were reflected in the FAQ. For those that are not, we will certainly get those added to the FAQ and get those updated as quickly as we possibly can.
Other than that, a lot of questions regarding when will this be available, and I'd say by the end of the week if it's on me.
Yep. So that would be my my goal as well, too, to get this up as quickly as possible, because again, we're a couple of weeks away from the application cycle being open. Thank everyone for hanging in there with us for an hour and 18 minutes on this webinar today related to broadband. I thank Liz from the Missouri Department of Agriculture for participating, Ashton and Eric and the communications team at the Department of Economic Development. If there are additional questions that come up, please reach out to myself. If you would love to have additional conversation on best practices or seek ideas or advice on, how, grant applications could be more well-rounded, I'm sure Liz will be also available as a resource too. Again, we thank everybody for participating today. We will get this presentation and the recording posted as quickly as we possibly can, hopefully within the next day or so. So with that, we thank everyone and have a great afternoon.